Sit back and settle in. Let's have some fun. Danny Pommells and Noah Levick with you here on the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University, Wilmu Works, and Ben Barry, our producer extraordinaire / co-host, always making things happen behind the scenes when you don't see his face or hear his voice. But all that said, it is a good time to be a 76ers basketball fan, tied for the second best record in the NBA. 10 wins for the 76ers team here with 13 games down. And we're on the eve of a back-to-back, but a lot has happened, Noah. We've played 3 in-season tournament games. We have gotten 25 points or more from Tyrese Maxey in 8 games this season. And the Sixers have just beat up on the Brooklyn Nets. No Ben Simmons in that game. And Embiid sat another fourth quarter. I mean, what's not to like about being a Sixers fan right now? A lot going on. You went to practice today, and a lot of topics to get to in particular, but thankful to have Kelly Oubre back in the mix, so to speak, as he's recovering from his injuries. But good time to be a Sixers fan at this juncture.
Yeah, I think that's been the case for the large majority of this season. Tough schedule with that back-to-back against Indy and Boston, and they dropped both those games, but I think it's still a lot of really encouraging stuff. Performance in Brooklyn was a comprehensive win, and they most definitely have that team's number. And I think Tyrese Maxey continues to showcase the playmaking growth and look like a lot for the All-Star game if the voting were to be done right now. And Joel Embiid, 9 assists, 1 turnover. I think that, again, stands out in his game. So I think the Sixers keep on trending in a good direction. And, the in-season tourney topic we'll dive a little more into. But as things stand, Sixers are 2-1. So they absolutely need to win this final one against Cleveland if they want to keep their hopes alive to play in Vegas. And if they get that win, then we get into some of the complicated permutations of who they need to root for and what have you. But Nick Nurse said that they're taking this thing seriously, and he likes that there's a little more juice, a little more competitiveness, just because the stakes are higher, with this tournament. So I think that'll be interesting to see tomorrow night. First matchup here against Cleveland, who has won 3 straight, just beat the Nuggets. And that'll be an interesting challenge for the Sixers here at Wells Fargo Center before they hit the road and play the Timberwolves. So, another pretty challenging back-to-back. I think arguably the very early portion of the schedule had some games the Sixers most definitely should have won, but now turning a little more challenging. And thus far, they've handled, I think, most of what's been in front of them exceptionally well, and it's been a really great start for the squad under Nurse.
Yeah, we got to be giving them a lot of praise for navigating a hardened situation, the new coaching regime, new scheme, new position for Tyrese Maxey, all of that combined, and the Sixers have overcome several obstacles to get to this, 10 wins on the season, and hopefully pick up another one here against Cleveland. And we will get to the in-season tournament, but it's worth mentioning the fact that the Sixers are a chance to get out of this group play, like you said, and get to this next phase of this interaction on the in-season tournament. And Dame Lillard with some viral comments about the fact that, a lot of guys on the team who don't make big bank, like Joel Embiid and Tobias Harris and, other guys on the squad, the money that you could get can help, guys, feed their families and do a few things that they wouldn't normally with winning the in-season tournament. So there's a lot of incentive there, but we'll get to that. Well, let's table that. But speaking of this Brooklyn game, another marvelous outing for DeAnthony Melton. I mean, he has really shown, in Kelly Oubre's absence, or whether Oubre has been here, just whatever the role or situation, and really shooting the basketball from distance has really been impressive. But flirting with, another, what did he have, 21 points in that game? So just fun to watch. And at certain times, bro, where I think the the 3 is going to go in every time he shoots it sometimes. So just great to see him really taking care of business and just being as advertised for the Sixers team.
Yeah. I think we sometimes overstate the extent to which role players are streaky or run hot and cold, but I think you nail it. Like his hot streaks are exceptionally hot, and the Sixers encourage him to ride the wave when he has it going. So yeah, I believe he's 16 for his last 25 from three, and Nick Nurse was really consistent that there wasn't any concern about his slow start, and the team just said, shoot when you're open, trust that they're going to start going in. Melton did acknowledge, though, in Brooklyn that at a certain point he tried to refocus on the basics, on the fundamentals of like getting his feet set, having good shot preparation, and just nailing the essentials to making jumpers. And I think it's obvious at this point that at his core, he's a really high-level shooter. So over the past 3 years on a good volume, he's been 39%. And right now he's skyrocketed up to 44, and the Sixers would love if he's around that and fully expect that to be the case. So, yeah, we see a lot of the similar situations, honestly, as when James Harden was here, when, Tyrese Maxey is driving or just when he has the basketball, drawing so much attention. Joel Embiid always does the same. The paint collapses, and the players around them need to take open threes. Sixers' three-point frequency is still quite low, but I think DeAnthony Melton habitually has been good at getting up the open shots, and fantastic for the Sixers that he has found his groove, has tons of confidence right now. And I think he's been an excellent role player for this team, and just having someone in addition to Tobias Harris who can go off for like 20 plus efficient points, it's a pretty formidable offense. And right now, going into the Monday night games, the Sixers literally have the best offensive rating in the league. Wow. So I think that's, worth commending, and not just about the two stars. I think the guys around them, such as Melton, have been pretty valuable too.
Yeah, it's easy to heap praise on Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, and rightfully so, because they have earned it with the way that they have been playing. But these others, as Shaquille O'Neal likes to say, and the role players surrounding Embiid and Maxey, you mentioned Tobias Harris, excuse me, Kelly Oubre was really playing lights out. But it hasn't just been the three-point shooting with Melton. It's really been him filling lanes, cutting back door, running the floor. He's been the recipient of some beautiful passes from Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, dunking the basketball. Listen, bro, whether he's hot or cold or the streakiness that comes with it, he's the type of player that you feel like delivers winning plays and can help you kind of navigate some of those, maybe tougher assignments and tougher matchups throughout a long NBA season.
Yeah, I think unlike some role players, like honestly, George Niang last year, not dependent on the jumper, right? Like he can still be positive when that's not falling. Mm-hmm. The finishing, as we touched on heading into the year, remains an important area, and it remains not a strength of his game. So, yes, he did have a couple nice plays around the rim yesterday, but he's 11 for 31 at the rim thus far per cleaning glass, which is bad. And he acknowledged as much after the game. He said, like, outside of today, I've been terrible. And Tyrese Maxey, gave him a little bit of stick for that. He heard the conversation. He said, "What are you talking about?" And then he thought for a second and he said, "Oh yeah, layups." Like everyone knows that is a weakness of DeAnthony Melton's game. And he sets himself up often very nicely with those fast breaks, and he'll run ahead of the pack, and he'll make some nice cuts and offensive rebounds. And then the finish is still disappointing. But I think all the Sixers can ask is that he keeps on plugging away, keeps trying to develop there. And Nick Nurse talked about that today. Like they fully understand it's an area of potential growth for a player who's still only 25. And if he can remain, a high-level three-point shooter and also become decent at the finishing aspect, that would be fantastic. So I think that is still a project, but you do see flashes that there's a lot of athletic ability, and he should be better at finishing than the numbers have indicated thus far. So the Sixers will hope that eventually becomes the case.
Speaking of flashes and opportunity, Kelly Oubre's absence has fostered a opportunity for others on the roster, like Daniel House, getting more chances and probably taking some of those minutes. But Jaden Springer and his development and his role that he's trying to carve out is really interesting to see him, particularly in the Pacers game, when the one that they won, when the Pacers were, they have this incredible, no pun intended, pace and tempo and getting up and down the floor. And Obi Toppin was really giving them problems. And there was a lot of, just take the ball out, get up and they're getting back on defense and then, zooming back on offense on misses or makes. But Nick Nurse was able to call on Jaden Springer to kind of stem the tide a little bit, kind of match some of the athleticism and, intensity defensively, and him just kind of being who he is as a player. Are we seeing him develop before our eyes and get more opportunity and fondness from the Nick Nurse staff? What exactly is taking shape there with Springer?
Yeah, I think the last week or so for him has been fantastic. And I think you got to give him a lot of credit for the maturity in his approach. And during the stint where he was piling up a few DNPs, he did talk about, I've realized like there's just a huge amount of importance in staying mentally sharp and being ready for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. And boom, suddenly Nick Nurse is playing him the entire second quarter of that Celtics game and the entire fourth quarter in Atlanta. So Nurse is a guy who likes to reward players who are excelling at their roles, and I think has shown a willingness to give bench players extended stints. And Springer has been deserving, I think, in both of those cases. He's been a little bit of a Trae Young stopper, right? He had that strong performance last year near the end of the regular season, and I thought was also excellent this last time out in Atlanta. Young shot 1 for 6, swing guarded by Springer. So I think elements of the offensive game are still a work in progress. It was nice that he hit a couple of garbage time jumpers from Brooklyn, but overall, we still see some hesitancy with the shot, though it is getting out of the hands quicker, and there's a little more willingness to fire. And some of the decision making can be shaky. But look, 21-year-old player who I think,
and definitely not getting the benefit of the doubt on the whistles either.
Yeah, he's gotten some harsh calls. Reminds you a little of when Paul Reed entered the game, and everyone saw how aggressive and ball hunting he was, and did not get the generous whistles. But I think regardless, the Sixers like that he really just has an attacking mindset, has a nose for the basketball as an offensive rebounder, and of course defensively, and just makes these like explosive basket erasing plays that come out of nowhere and surprise guys who haven't played against Jaden Springer before. So yeah, I don't think he's a lock to be in this team's playoff rotation or continue to play 20 plus minutes every night. But I think a lot of the progress recently has been encouraging. It hasn't felt fluky. And yeah, if some of the 3-point shooting that we saw in the preseason starts to trickle into the regular season, that would obviously be massive as well for Jaden Springer.
Do you think this is a conglomerate of, like a confluence of circumstances with him being more mature, having another year under his belt and development and et cetera, and the Nick Nurse offense helping provide some of these opportunities? Would we have seen this same version of Jaden Springer if he had been given more opportunities with Doc Rivers? Or do you feel like his style of play is favored by the system Nick Nurse is running?
I think I probably fall somewhere in the middle. I do think he's become a noticeably better all-around player, even over the past 6 months.
Confidence.
Yeah, confidence in himself. And I think even the defensive instincts and decision-making are sharper. That was never a weakness of his game, but just a little more like assertiveness and when he's able to gamble, when he's able to apply ball pressure,
right.
Knowing when he has those chances to like blow up a play as a weak side rim protector. So yeah, I think offensively, he hasn't been super productive quite yet. We have seen good flashes as a cutter, which Nurse always encourages. The Sixers love their guys making slot cuts and moving around Joel Embiid when he's double teamed. I think the offensive rebounding that has shined a little bit under Nurse in a way it probably wouldn't have under Doc Rivers, who was a little more cautious with the transition defense approach. But yeah, I think for the most part, I just give the credit to Jaden Springer here and the developmental strides he's made. As a 21-year-old who wasn't in a super favorable position, and Nurse even in the preseason seemed surprised that Springer was already this good and this capable of fighting for minutes. So I think Nurse and his staff have done well to give justified opportunities, but I think Springer has battled for those opportunities and has clawed his way into this picture just through his own work.
Yeah, good for him, man. Definitely a player to keep an eye on and someone, fans, can latch onto as the season progresses. And, it's so much fun and watching Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid, and it kind of overshadows some of the smaller, more nuanced things that are happening with the team. But Springer, definitely someone to enjoy and keep an eye on if you aren't already. Let's pay some bills here in the Sixers Talk podcast. We'll talk more about the in-season tournament as well as Nick Batum and his impact. A very interesting case is he, but we are brought to you by Wilmington University. Find your higher education home at Wilmington University, where your academic success is celebrated by a caring community. Explore your opportunities at wilmu.edu. Celebrity cook Steve Martorano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martorano's prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations for Martorano's prime on Open Table. Sounds delicious. Back here on the Sixers Talk podcast. Sixers playing a back-to-back. Cleveland got to win this in-season tournament game and then taking on Rudy Gobert and the Minnesota Timberwolves. But can we get to the Oubre situation and just kind of tie that up? And what exactly is the latest with him? You were at practice today. Did you see him on a side court? And what is the progress there?
Yeah, today was the first day for the Sixers that he has returned to the basketball floor. So initially he was just on the exercise bike and trying to keep the lungs moving a little bit. But he did quite a bit today for what we saw after the practice. So did some, little sprints up and down the court, and then did some work with Rico Hines as well, just putting up jumpers off the catch, off the dribble. Doing a little bit of,
Did we see any wrapping, any bandages, a flak jacket, anything like that?
Yeah, he did have some sort of wrap in the rib area.
Okay.
It didn't look super restrictive. He did seem to be moving well and without a ton of obvious discomfort. But yes, he did have something in that region for the time being. And Nick Nurse said still no definitive timeline. His understanding from the Sixers medical folks is that today and tomorrow are important ones in figuring out when exactly Oubre will be able to return. But regardless, the Sixers see it as really positive that he's back out there 9 days after suffering a fractured rib. And they're not gonna rush him back before it is prudent. But I think they're all pleased that he's back around the team and doing some basketball work, after a pretty major incident in his life here. So he's the only Sixer for now who is sidelined, and they've obviously done some good stuff without him. Well, we'll talk about Nick Batum and the role he has played as a replacement starter here, but regardless, I think it certainly looks like a healthy Oubre makes the Sixers a better, more well-rounded team. And gives them a greater variety of options on the wing and some scoring pop. And the Sixers would love to have that back. Doesn't seem like it's going to happen, any day now, but also seems like as long as things proceed according to plan, he might not be back in too long for the Sixers.
Any glimpse into his demeanor, mood? Was he flashing any smiles, or did he seem encumbered by the injury or any of that type of thing? Any body language stuff you noticed?
Yeah, nothing major. Seemed to just be going about his work. I'm sure he was glad to be back out there.
Sure.
Yeah, you see the little minor signs of discomfort, and I'm sure a lot of that's just adjusting to an injury that's unfamiliar to him. But honestly, he looked very similar to the player we saw before. Like the jumper was Kelly Oubre's jumper. And yeah, I'm not familiar with all the nuances of a broken rib or things we should be looking out for, but it seemed like day one back on the court looked like it went fine for him, and he was able to get through some solid work out there. And yeah, we shall hear more, I think, pretty soon about when exactly he's expected to be back on the court, in games.
Sixers get this big W in Brooklyn. Embiid sits the fourth quarter, and they, like you said, have survived well without Kelly Oubre, surprisingly, considering how well he was playing and what he was bringing to the team. It was looking like a great situation for the 76ers. Hopefully there is continuity there for him when he comes back, that he hits the ground running in that regard. I do have to, before we move to Batum, mention a sour note. I wanted to mention it earlier, but I kind of sat on it. But I was kind of sad after the Sixers game, Noah, because there was this jovial kumbaya, love hugging, dap up situation that happened with DeAnthony Melton, Tyrese Maxey, and Mikal Bridges. And man, it just made me I hadn't even thought about the whole Zaire Smith and trade and all that stuff. Which is also ironic because it was in Brooklyn when that whole thing happened and he's playing for the Nets. I don't know if I've ever really made that connection mentally, but it was just seeing them all like buddy. It just just brought back all those painful thoughts about what could have been. And I don't even think that Maxey would be on the team had they drafted Bridges. Like, I don't even think that connection would even come to fruition, but it was fun, like daydreaming, or even traded for Melton. I don't even know if any of that would have even like happened, but it was just, I was daydreaming. I was looking at it and just they seem like so friendly with each other. Like, why couldn't they all be on the same team? My team.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tyrese Maxey's continued star emergence has shed a little more light on how much good fortune was involved in him being a Sixer. The Mike Muscala shot, as Tyrese Maxey said after his 50-point game, he gets reminded of often and is grateful for. He's glad to be in Philly. And then just, it's been said a million times, but the fact that he fell to 21st in the draft. And I do remember even in that draft cycle, it seemed like he was a lock for the lottery. And then I guess a lot of executives just overthought it and said, oh, he was only 29% from three at Kentucky. I don't know if we can trust him as a shooter, and I don't know if he's too small or if he's capable of, being an NBA league guard. And just the amount that everyone was wrong, it all just worked out so fantastically for the Sixers who snapped him up. So, yeah, I think
there are some things that have gone wrong, but that is not one of them.
No, everything went right for the Sixers there, and I think that has just had a much, much vaster impact than anyone could have imagined. I think even if you love Tyrese Maxey's game and personality in that draft class, I'm not so sure you could have seen him being a guy who's like on track to be an all-star, 23 years old, and has stepped in so well to the lead ball handler shoes of James Harden. And even if you loved Tyrese Maxey, I think this amount of improvement in his first 4 NBA seasons, hard to forecast. And the Sixers will be grateful for all of
it. And he got his first technical foul a couple of games ago, which seemed really weird. But he was pretty demonstrative right in the ref's face. And when you slow it down and look at the slow-mo, the ref is just, aghast, staring at him. But his first technical foul, which is hard to believe with a guy.
Yeah, not in character. And I think Nick Nurse is going to start picking up a few, in defense of Tyrese Maxey. He's getting more and more, I think, willing to express his annoyance and frustrations at Maxey not getting calls that Nurse feels he deserves. And to Maxey's credit, like we do see more of those James Harden-esque tricks that he's trying to pull out, where he will feel a little bump and throw up a runner, or gain a half step on someone in the pick and roll, and then try to use that angle to create contact. And yeah, the whistles still aren't blowing his way very much for a star level player. So I think Nick Nurse is going to get into some heated disagreements with officials this season if it continues that way.
Yeah, Maxey and the emergence of his role and who he is, and I just love to see how it just becomes a part of like the ether of basketball, of him as a player, and seeing the NBA TV guys talking about him and his performance. And I saw Kevin O'Connor from The Ringer ranked, like the top 50 players in the NBA, and the guys at the top who you might expect, like Lillard and Giannis and Steph and whatnot. But right there on the same tier with Anthony Davis, he had Maxey on the same tier with like Anthony Davis. It was like a couple tiers down, like 4 maybe 10 tiers down, but it was just wow, like just crazy to think. But yeah, fun problem to have.
Yeah, I think he's the most improved favorite right now, and to me, part of what's wild about that is he got so much better last year too. And
right. And you thought he was in the running last year for that.
Right, yeah, he was in the discussion pretty late in the regular season.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's very common for a fourth-year player to have taken a year 3 leap and then to be on track for an even larger one in the season. So I think he should be able to keep it up. It's not like he's shooting out of his mind from 3-point range. The low turnover game is just so ingrained in his style. And I think the 2-man game with Embiid should only evolve from here. So I think he should be able to keep up this all-star level play. And I think this is just who Tyrese Maxey is now. He's a star, and the Sixers are glad to have that next to Joel Embiid. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the Harden-esque stuff, and make what you want of the time Harden was here, or the facilitating of the trade between him and Harden, and whether they should have went after Halliburton or someone else, or however what you want to make from that. Tyrese Maxey's game benefited from being in that incubator with James Harden for that year and a half, and you can see some of those style of play things, obviously the footwork on the step back and all that stuff. He wouldn't have had that if Harden wasn't here. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that just some of those little nuanced and veteran moves and things that Harden had, Maxey gleaned a few of those things, and the Sixers are much better off for it.
Yeah, no, I think there's no question about that. I mean, I remember back to the very first day that James Harden practiced with the Sixers, and Tyrese Maxey was right alongside him taking those step-back jumpers.
Wow.
Those guys, a couple summers ago, did a bunch of joint workouts together, and Maxey studied it all very closely. And
yes, he did.
Learned the little secrets and the tricks. And Harden was pretty vocal game after game about pushing him to be more aggressive, and you saw a lot of instances where he wouldn't be thrilled that Maxey, passed up an open jumper or, missed a read in a pick and roll. And I think James Harden took some pride in having a mentorship role there and seeing Maxey's potential and wanting to foster it. And Maxey was, as usual, all ears. So, I think that was most definitely beneficial for the Sixers. Tyrese Maxey is a guy who's going to soak up whatever knowledge is around him, and James Harden had a lot of that to offer, and it's been great for the Sixers in that regard.
Could Tyrese Maxey glean some things from Nick Batum, a really savvy veteran that has shown some propensity to come off the bench, to work in the starting lineup, shoot the basketball, and just be a real pro out there on the court? Big, I'm going to heap some praise on you whenever I get a chance. You mentioned when Batum's name was in the trade that he could be a potential starter for the 76ers, and that made my ears perk up. I wasn't quite prepared to hear that, but it looks like, particularly with Oubre out, that there's something there, particularly with his savvy, his on the court presence, his veteran acumen. Speak to that a little bit, Noah, about where he's fitting in and how Nick Nurse and company like his versatility in the starting lineup.
Right. I mean, I think it's looking like he's going to stay a starter as long as he's available, barring something unforeseen. I think the notion of Oubre eventually coming off the bench and giving some useful scoring there, that sounds quite fine. But yeah, Nick Batum, the Sixers are 5-0 when he plays, so they'll look to keep that rolling here. And just the way that Joel Embiid glowed about him in Brooklyn certainly caught my ear. I mean, he said Nick Batum is the key, he's special, and he just rattled off a bunch of the positive qualities that he brings to the table. Many of which you touched on. I think the basketball IQ jumps off the charts, the quick decision making, the ease with which he plays and with which he makes everyone around him able to just flow. It just makes a lot of those simple, sensible, like common sense passes that you realize aren't really the norm for NBA players. Yeah, yesterday was game 1001, so has accumulated tons and tons of experience. But it is interesting that I think this has always been the essence of his game. You know, I was asking about, have you always felt comfortable in a glue guy sort of role? And he said, yeah, when I was 18 years old playing the FIBA European Championships, I was the MVP and I only averaged 12 points. I've always just had a lot that I do besides scoring that helps my teams. Looked it up. He gave himself not quite enough credit, averaged 14 points there. But I think he just innately has a really well-rounded game and takes a lot of pleasure in like playing team-oriented basketball. I think also defensively, just the physical tools enable him to be versatile, right? Like Sixers played some effective zone in Brooklyn, and it stood out to me that you've got a 7-foot-plus wingspan out there in Batum who's going to be sharp about those little zone decisions of, when do I stun at this shooter or when do I, allow this, less competent guy to fire beyond the arc. Just some of those little defensive decisions he always seems to nail, at least thus far for the Sixers. So, you don't want to like overstate the impact and say that he's as important as like one of the Sixers star players, but this is someone who's been a massively impactful role player in multiple spots, certainly was that for the Clippers. And so far, very, very good for the Sixers. And just the fact that like the MVP and the best player on this team considers him so valuable, I think speaks volumes.
That means they're going to trade him now. That means he'll be shipped away. That Joel loves him, so they'll be sent away. But let's hope Batum, the Sixers as a squad are ready for this Cleveland game, in-season tournament game number 4, the last group play, as you mentioned. And how do you think the guys are taken to the in-season tournament? I really like the red court. I didn't think I would, but I really like the red court. And I feel like it just brings a little bit more. You just know the game's different. It's not just a regular NBA game night. And I'm starting to warm up to it, me personally. But that wasn't my question to you. But what do you think the guys are feeling about the in-season tournament?
Yeah, I think overall there's been a little more interest and excitement about it than I would have expected.
Okay.
The courts have generally gotten positive reviews. I mean, we've heard from some others around the league who don't love the idea of maybe the court is contributing to some slips and falls, which obviously you don't
right because it's so new, right?
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is like legit physical, minor differences with the court, and how much of that might just be, perception and mental. But that's not good if that's a widespread issue. But haven't heard any of that on the Sixers end, and I think they've liked the challenge of these games matter a little more, and even when we're up 8 with a minute left, like we're still pressing on defense.
I know. And they're still shooting and trying to score because the point differential matters in who might advance. So at the very end of their last season tournament game against Atlanta, they were still like chucking the ball up, which is very odd because there's a lot of unwritten rules, obviously written around when you shoot the ball and guys who gets the last turnover and all that stuff. But yeah, a good point.
Yeah, that's just all out the window now. So, it's also a way that you see a little bit less of the, in-game load management, right? Like if a team has a sizable lead late in the fourth quarter, but needs to score a little more for the point differential, they're going to keep their best player in there. So I think no doubt it does legitimately feel more important than an average regular season game.
Did you feel like the fans? I felt like the fans at the end of the Atlanta game were a little caught off guard by the way that, you know what I mean? Like the way the Sixers were still attacking a little bit. Like they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like you can't, like, I felt that like watching the game a little bit. So we're all getting used to it a little bit is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, it's just very different for everyone. And Nick Nurse has, I think, more experiences like this because he's coached overseas, and he's even talked about having 3 or 4 simultaneous cups going on, and he would have to write it out on the board for his team, like here's the standing in this cup and that cup. And so I think he's someone who just naturally feels up for these games and feels motivated. Yeah, no one's pretending this is as important as the playoffs or anything along those lines, but it's exceeded what I expected just purely in terms of players are giving a little bit more effort and considering this something that matters a little bit more. Yeah, and I think the final stage of this will be really interesting because there's going to be a heck of a lot of scoreboard watching, like just trying to figure out exactly what's significant for the Sixers. There could be a lot of games that they have to monitor here because there's the whole wild card factor. If they don't end up winning their group. And in that case, you would need to be the best of the non-group winners in the Eastern Conference. So, yeah, if like you're the kind of person who likes, monitoring the NBA and looking at all the games, there's a little bit of that exotic factor, I think, that's going to, pop up here soon as well.
And from a player standpoint, let's say they go all the way to Vegas, they win the whole thing. Everybody's getting paid. You get to celebrate. There's like a little time off afterward, maybe before the next game, where you get to stay in Vegas a little bit, maybe enjoy the championship. I feel like it could be pretty sweet. Like it could be a nice incentive that people. I didn't know if it would hit the ground running like it has, and I feel like people are latching onto it. So I feel like there's something there.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, I'm curious what are going to be the takeaways from this year? Is it going to be a situation where there's
tweaks and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, just because it seems like the incentives are working, is the NBA going to say, okay, let's add a greater incentive of like if you win the in-season tournament and you weren't a play-in team, well, now there's an extra play-in spot somehow built in, or something along those lines. But yeah,
or they bring down a 25-point basket at the end of the fourth quarter for that team only to shoot at their end.
That you can just drop it at any game you need it. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to get too gimmicky, I think.
Right, of course not. Right.
But yeah, thus far, just the notion of like, hey, if you win this thing, everyone gets some cash and gets to go to Vegas and gets to celebrate having won something meaningful. All of those seem to be working. And yeah, I think, the games themselves will have a really large impact on how this is all judged. I think it was great for the NBA that first play-in tournament had some awesome, like tight games down to the wire. And, the NBA will hope for the same, that those Vegas spotlight games in the semifinals are really excellent and put a positive light on in-season tournament number 1.
And these are competitive, really competitive, ultra competitive people. You add a little extra incentive, some bragging rights, some money into the equation. I think that they've touched a few, chords, struck a few chords with this that I think players will respond to over time as it changes, as it develops, as they make it more nuanced and kind of a perfect fit for how it fits into the NBA schedule, or how they grow it, how they modify it. So will be fun to see. Hopefully the Sixers are continuing to advance in this thing, and we'll hope that they can just beat Cleveland and make it simple, but we'll keep an eye on how the tiebreakers and wild cards and all that plays out. But For Noah Levick, I'm Danny Pommells. Before we go, Noah, the website, NBC Sports Philadelphia.com. What's cooking there for you?
Yeah, so had coverage yesterday from Brooklyn. A little more on Nick Batum and the delightful impact he has had thus far for the Sixers, as well as DeAnthony Melton and the keys to him breaking out of the early season slump. Story I will have up tonight as well, with some of the details on Kelly Oubre Jr. being back on the court and some of the challenges ahead for the Sixers with this back-to-back against Cleveland and Minnesota, and those teams throwing out some two big lineups that the Sixers will have to counter here. I think, not an easy task, but Nick Nurse, I think, sounds intrigued by some of the experimentation that might be coming here.
Noah, much love, much respect, happiness, enjoyment to you and your family here on Turkey Day and Thanksgiving. Same to you, Ben, and I hope you guys get to enjoy and get some relaxation here in these next couple of days.
Absolutely. Happy Thanksgiving to all.
Thanks very much. So check out Noah Levick's work on NBC Sports Philadelphia.com and follow him on social media at Noah Levick. For Ben Barry, I'm Danny Pommells. Thanks for listening to the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU Works. We'll see you next time.